Welcome to One Chapter, One Thought. I'm Pastor Chris from Lincroft Bible Church in New Jersey. Every weekday, I read one chapter of the New Testament and offer one brief devotional thought. Today's reading is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27. Now when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate, the governor. Then, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus had been condemned, he felt remorse. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to that yourself." So Judas threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests took the pieces of silver and said, "It's not lawful to put them in the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood." So they conferred together and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, asking, "Are you king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while Jesus was being accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing for the people one prisoner whom they wanted. At that time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what will I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" And they said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but instead a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, "His blood shall be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas for them. But after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him. They took the reed and began to beat him on the head. After they mocked him, they took off the scarlet robe and put on his own garments, and led him away to crucify him. As they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. When they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him there. And above his head they put up the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." At that time 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those passing by were hurling abuse at Jesus, wagging their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others. He can't save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if God delights in him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Then robbers who had been crucified with him were also insulting him with the same words. Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, This man is calling out for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, Let's see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And the earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became frightened and said, Truly, this was the Son of God. Many women were there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had been a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the grave. Now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that when Jesus was still alive, that deceiver said, After 3 days I am to rise again. Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, He has risen from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how. And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard they set a seal on the stone. One thought. Why was Jesus born? Very simply, Jesus was born to die. Jesus knew that he must go to that cross and pay for the sins of the world. But I think a question that's not asked quite as often is, why was Jesus buried? Or more specifically, why would we make a big deal about Jesus being buried? In fact, the burial of Jesus is what the Apostle Paul, writing not too long after the Gospel of Matthew, says that one of the essentials of the Gospel is that Jesus was buried. In 1 Corinthians 15, he talks about Jesus' life and his death and his burial. And later, it's kind of hard to know, a couple decades or 100 years or so after the events of Christ, there was a creed that was written that enshrined and summarized a lot of the biblical teaching so that Christians could kind of know it more easily. It was called the Apostles' Creed, and it talked about how Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, died, and was buried. And here, in Matthew 27, we see that Matthew spends quite a long time talking about the burial of Jesus. He highlights that this man named Joseph of Arimathea comes and gets the body of Jesus and puts Jesus' body, buries it in a tomb, which was hewn out in the side of a rock, and a large and massive stone was rolled in front of the mouth of the tomb. Often in those days, there would have been like a big trench that was dug out in front of the mouth of the tomb so that the stone would roll down into the trench and obviously be much harder to roll away from the mouth of the tomb there. Furthermore, it talks about how Mary Magdalene was there, the other Mary were sitting opposite the grave. And then the chapter ends up with the Pharisees acknowledging that if this message that Jesus had risen again gets out, that it could change everything. And so they go to Pilate and say, hey, let's put some soldiers in front of this tomb so that there can't be any deception or any false claims that Jesus has risen from the dead. So what I think is happening is we see the explanation right here in the text, and it's totally about the claim that Jesus has risen. That's why his burial is so important. The Pharisees kind of accurately sum up everything, and they say, let's make the tomb secure, otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, he has risen from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first. The Pharisees understand that the empty tomb would be the validating evidence of the resurrection. And that's exactly why the burial of Jesus is so important. Because the burial of Jesus testifies that Jesus did in fact die. And he had to die in order to pay for our sins. And then the burial of Jesus sets the stage for the miracle of his resurrection, which changes everything. If Jesus was not buried, there would be no validation of his death. If Jesus was not buried, there would be no stage set for the validation of his resurrection. And so, as mentioned in Matthew 26, the previous reading, we talked about how our faith is not blind. It's not just believing something contrary to evidence, and this faith is based in God's revelation, God's word, the Old Testament. But here in Matthew 27, we really see that what makes Christianity unique is its historical claim that Jesus really died. He was a real person in real human history who really died. He was really buried, and then he really rose from the dead. And so, think of the burial of Jesus. Behold the burial of Jesus. And know that it is setting the stage for the empty tomb, the validation that our faith is alive because we worship a living Messiah.